10:15 a.m., July 18, 1989. A young woman is crossing her apartment to answer it. She's expecting a script. She has an audition with Francis Ford Coppola in a few hours. A role in the Godfather Part III. The kind of morning that feels like the beginning of everything. Rebecca Lucille Schaeffer was born November 6, 1967, in Eugene, Oregon. She wasn't manufactured by Hollywood. She was a real kid from the Pacific Northwest who decided she wanted something more. At 16, she moved to New York alone to pursue modeling. That detail matters. This was a girl with nerve. She wasn't waiting to be discovered. She went looking. By her late teens, she transitioned into acting, landing a small role on the daytime soap One Life to Live before catching her big break in 1986, a co-starring role on the CBS sitcom My Sister Sam alongside Pam Dawber. The show ran 2 seasons and put Rebecca's face in living rooms across America every week. She was warm on screen in a way that felt unperformed. Audiences didn't just watch her, they felt like they knew her. That feeling of knowing her was about to become the most dangerous thing about her life. Off-screen, she was by all accounts exactly who she appeared to be. Colleagues remembered her as kind, present, genuinely interested in people. A veteran hairstylist on the My Sister Sam set, Judy Crown, would later recall fan mail and gifts arriving on set regularly. She'd pull Rebecca aside. "Don't respond to those. People can be strange. Just ignore it." Rebecca nodded. She was polite. She was 19 years old. She didn't think much of it. She wrote back to some of them anyway. One of those letters went to a teenage boy in Tucson, Arizona. His name was Robert John Bardo. He was 16. And her reply, a kind, brief, form letter response, became, in his mind, the beginning of a relationship. To understand what happened to Rebecca Schaeffer, you have to understand Robert John Bardo. Not to sympathize with him, there is nothing sympathetic here, but because obsession of this kind doesn't appear from nowhere. It builds. It has a structure. And that structure had warning signs at every single stage that the people around him either missed or dismissed. Bardo was the youngest of 7 children. His father was a U.S. Air Force non-commissioned officer, his mother Japanese-born. The family relocated constantly. That kind of rootlessness does particular damage to a child who's already struggling. By the time the family settled in Tucson in the early 1980s, Bardo was a teenager with no stable social foundation and no sense of where he belonged. He was a high school dropout who worked a grill at Jack in the Box and couldn't hold the job. The only thing that gave him any feeling of connection was write letters to famous women. Before Rebecca, there was Samantha Smith, the 10-year-old American girl who had written a letter to Soviet Premier Yuri Andropov in 1982 pleading for peace and became an international symbol. Bardo was fixated on her. When Samantha Smith was killed in a plane crash in 1985 at age 13, he grieved like he'd lost someone he knew. Because in his mind, he had. He transferred the fixation entirely to Rebecca Schaeffer. And when she replied to his letter, he took it as confirmation she knew him too. This was real. In 1987, he flew from Tucson to Burbank. He showed up at Warner Brothers Studios clutching flowers and a giant teddy bear, asking security to let him onto the My Sister Sam set. He had to see her. He loved her. Security Chief Jack Egger turned him away, but gently, thinking he was just a lovesick kid. He even drove Bardo back to his hotel. They talked in the car. Egger told him it would be best to go home to Tucson. Bardo said he would. 1 month later, Bardo returned to Warner Brothers. This time with a knife. He was turned away again. No police were called. No record was made. He went home. For a while, it seemed like the danger had passed. Bardo shifted his attention to other young female celebrities, Debbie Gibson, Tiffany, Madonna. My Sister Sam was cancelled in 1988. Rebecca moved on to film work. Bardo seemed to recede. Then in 1989, Rebecca appeared in a brief romantic scene in the black comedy film Scenes from the Class Struggle in Beverly Hills, lying in bed with a male actor. Bardo watched it. Something broke in him. He decided she had betrayed him. In his own words, she needed to be punished for becoming another Hollywood whore. The warmth he'd carried toward her for 3 years curdled overnight into something else entirely. He began planning. He had read about Arthur Richard Jackson, a Scottish drifter who in 1982 had stalked actress Teresa Saldana, hired a private investigator to find her home address through California DMV records, and stabbed her outside her home. Jackson had been convicted and sentenced. But what Bardo took from that story wasn't a warning. It was a blueprint. He hired a private detective in Tucson. The detective contacted the California DMV. Rebecca Schaeffer's home address, 120 North Sweetser Avenue, West Hollywood, was handed over for $250. No law prevented it. No flag was raised. Her address was public property as far as the state of California was concerned. Bardo's brother, not knowing what it was for, helped him buy a handgun. He loaded it with hollow point bullets. The night before he traveled to Los Angeles, Bardo threatened his neighbors across the street who were throwing a party, "If you don't shut up, I'll get my .357 Magnum and shoot you." Several people heard him. Several people found him frightening. No one called the police. The next morning he boarded a bus to Los Angeles. This is the part of the story people think they know. They don't know it the way it actually happened. Rebecca Schaeffer woke up that morning with a specific kind of anticipation, the nervous, electric feeling of a day that could change everything. She was scheduled to audition for Francis Ford Coppola for the role of Mary Corleone in The Godfather Part III. It was the kind of opportunity that comes once. She was waiting for a messenger to deliver the script to her West Hollywood apartment so she could prepare. She was 21 years old. She was, by every account, exactly on the edge of the career she'd been building toward. Bardo arrived at 120 North Sweetser Avenue sometime that morning. He knocked. Rebecca answered the door. She was polite. She spoke with him briefly. She may have signed an autograph. Then she asked him to leave. He left. She closed the door. Most people, having answered a strange knock and sent a stranger away, would not open that door again. At 10:15 a.m., the doorbell rang again. She answered it. Bardo shot her twice in the chest at point-blank range. A neighbor found her collapsed in the doorway. Paramedics arrived, but there was nothing to be done. Rebecca Schaeffer died on the threshold of her own home on the morning she'd been waiting for the Godfather script to arrive. The role of Mary Corleone went to Sofia Coppola. The film was released 5 months later. Bardo fled on foot through the Hollywood Hills. The following day he was spotted on a freeway overpass in Tucson, running in the road, screaming, behaving erratically. Police picked him up. Among his belongings, a copy of The Catcher in the Rye. That detail deserves a moment. Mark David Chapman had a copy of The Catcher in the Rye on him when he shot John Lennon outside the Dakota in 1980. John Hinckley Jr. was carrying it when he shot Ronald Reagan in 1981. Bardo had visited the Dakota building in New York. He had studied celebrity killers the way someone studies a discipline. He had a letter he'd written to his sister in which he wrote, "I have an obsession with the unobtainable." He was 19 years old. He was tried and prosecuted by a young Los Angeles County DA named Marsha Clark, who in 1991 secured a conviction for first-degree murder and a sentence of life without parole. 3 years later, Marsha Clark would prosecute O.J. Simpson. Court reporters who covered both trials noted that the Bardo case was in many ways a rehearsal, the first moment where celebrity, violent crime, and media spectacle fused in a way that would define the decade. Robert John Bardo is still in prison. He was stabbed by another inmate in 2007, survived, and remains incarcerated at Mule Creek State Prison. He will never be released. But the story doesn't end with the conviction. It doesn't end with a sentence. Because the most important consequence of Rebecca Schaeffer's murder wasn't what happened to Robert John Bardo. It was what happened to the law. To understand why Rebecca Schaeffer's murder changed America, you have to go back 7 years, to a case that should have changed it first, and didn't. April 15, 1982. Teresa Saldana was a rising actress in Hollywood. She'd worked with Martin Scorsese on Raging Bull, with Brian De Palma on I Wanna Hold Your Hand. She wasn't a household name yet, but she was working, she was building something, and she had no reason to feel unsafe on a Tuesday morning outside her own home in West Hollywood. Arthur Richard Jackson was a Scottish-born drifter with a long history of mental illness who had entered and re-entered the United States illegally for decades. He had become convinced that Teresa Saldana was meant to be with him, that they shared a spiritual destiny. He hired a private investigator. The investigator pulled Saldana's home address from California DMV records. Jackson showed up at her home with a hunting knife and stabbed her multiple times. She survived only because a Sparkletts water delivery driver happened to be nearby and physically wrestled Jackson away from her. Jackson was convicted of attempted murder and sentenced to the then maximum of 12 years. Teresa Saldana spent years recovering, physically, financially, psychologically. She later starred in a TV movie about the attack that required her to reenact the stabbing. She founded an advocacy group called Victims for Victims. She went to Sacramento and Washington and testified and lobbied and pushed for laws that would make what happened to her a crime before it happened rather than after. Nobody changed the laws. Jackson was granted parole in 1989. He was not released because from prison, he immediately began sending Saldana new death threats. He received additional time. Eventually he was extradited to the UK in 1996 for a 1966 murder charge, found not guilty by reason of diminished responsibility, and committed to a British psychiatric hospital, where he died of heart failure in 2004. He never left. But here is the detail that should stop you cold. Robert John Bardo read about Arthur Richard Jackson in a magazine. He read the story of how Jackson found Teresa Saldana, the private investigator, the DMV records, the $250, and he used the exact same method to find Rebecca Schaeffer 7 years later. The system that nearly killed Teresa Saldana in 1982 killed Rebecca Schaeffer in 1989 through the identical mechanism. Nothing had been changed. No one had closed the gap. The warning was written in Saldana's blood and the legislature looked away. One more detail, and it is perhaps the bitterest one in this entire story: the California anti-stalking law that was eventually passed because of Rebecca Schaeffer's murder, if it had been in effect on July 18, 1989, would not have protected her. The original 1990 law required that the victim be aware of a credible threat of death or bodily harm. Rebecca Schaeffer never knew Bardo was coming. The law created in her name contained a loophole large enough for her own killer to walk through. It took for more years of revision to close it. Before July 18, 1989, stalking was not a crime in the United States. Not in any state. Not under any statute. You could follow a person for years, send them hundreds of letters, show up at their home, stand outside their door, and you had committed no crime until the moment you laid hands on them or threatened them directly. The law arrived only after the wound. In 1990, California passed the nation's first anti-stalking law, making it a criminal offense to willfully, maliciously, and repeatedly follow or harass another person with the intent to place them in fear for their safety. The LAPT created a threat management unit, the first dedicated stalking investigation unit in any police department in the country. Within 3 years, every single state in the United States had enacted similar legislation. The legal category of stalking, which did not exist in 1989, had become universal in America within 4 years of Rebecca Schaeffer's death. In 1994, Congress passed the Driver's Privacy Protection Act. The California DMV, and every DMV in the country, was permanently barred from releasing personal address information to the public. The $250 loophole that a private investigator had used to find Teresa Saldana. The same $250 loophole that killed Rebecca Schaeffer. Gone. Permanently. Teresa Saldana, who had spent 12 years lobbying for that specific provision, lived to see it become federal law. She died in 2016. Today, every major celebrity has security protocols, threat assessment teams, and legal protections that trace directly back to the morning Rebecca Schaeffer answered her door. The entertainment industry's relationship with fan access, with address privacy, with the line between admiration and danger, all of it changed because of her. The LAPD's Threat Management Unit has assessed thousands of cases and almost certainly prevented murders we will never hear about, because the people who would have been killed are still alive. Rebecca Schaeffer was 21 years old. She was from Eugene, Oregon. She was kind and ambitious and naive in the way that 21-year-olds are supposed to be naive, trusting that the world has basic safeguards, that someone would have noticed, that answering the door twice in one morning was a reasonable thing to do. The safeguards didn't exist. No one had noticed. And she paid for the gap in the law with her life. What she left behind isn't a filmography, though it exists, and it's worth watching. What she left behind is a legal architecture that protects millions of people who never knew her name. Every restraining order issued for stalking. Every arrest made before a confrontation happens. Every DMV clerk who cannot hand over your home address to a stranger with $250, those are Rebecca Schaeffer's. She didn't get to be in the Godfather Part III. She didn't get to find out what her career would have become. She was waiting for a script on the morning she died. The laws she made possible have been protecting people for 35 years. That is her story. And it deserved to be told.